Now this is going to be a really good example of why I used the term container or wrap earlier, because what we're actually going to do is wrap these two divs within another div. So to do so, let's go ahead and create our div tag here on line 43, and we're going to put the closing div tag down here on 66. So both opening and closing div tags of these other two are going to be within this. And to better illustrate that, let's go ahead and tab these out. Now out of the box, let's go ahead and see what happens here. And this is probably not what you're expecting. So let's get into a little bit of troubleshooting here. Let's look at this and kind of talk about what's going on just from this visual point of view here. We have 3 divs on this page. And right now you can see all 3 of them. You can see our 2 columns here, which aren't columns anymore. But up here, this is actually the div that we just created, the one that's supposed to be wrapping around these two. But if you'll notice, this div, instead of being, the way it is out of the box where it spans across the whole page, it looks to be about 400 pixels wide. And if you haven't figured it out yet, that's because we set this div rule here to apply to all the divs on the page. So we need to change a couple things here in order to get what we want. And I also don't want the background to be gray. We really just want this div to be invisible. We're really just using it to push these columns together. And the way we wanted to do this is we're going to use this div by forcing the width of it to be smaller than the page, thus pushing the 2 elements in it together. So since column 1 and column 2 are both 400 pixels wide, we want our container to be at least 800 pixels. So we need to move some of these properties around. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to highlight all this, and I'm going to cut it and paste a copy of it here in column 1, and paste another copy here in column 2. Now there are more efficient ways to do this, but we'll discuss that when we actually are talking more about CSS. For now, we just know that now we have the color and the spacing and width properties set for both these columns. So we'll go ahead and save, and we'll take another look. There we go. Now we're back to the way it was, and that's a good thing, because now we have a div in there that's not being seen, and the width isn't smaller than the 2 of these combined. What we need to do first is give this div here, our quote wrap or container, a class name. So just to be generic, we'll go ahead and call it wrap. And then up here, it's just in between column 1 and our empty div rule, go ahead and use the selector wrap to pinpoint the wrap class, and we'll simply give it a width of 800 pixels. So what this should do now is shrink the amount of space that those 2 columns have, thus pushing them closer together. And since each one of them are 400 pixels, we would think that 800 pixels should do the trick. So save, refresh, and again, another undesired effect. Now, I knew going into this why this would happen, but I wanted to give you an example of how to correct some of these, because when you're first starting out in here, some of the obvious things, like say making this 800 pixels, won't have the effect you're looking for, and I want to kind of show you a way to work through some of these issues so you can avoid them, because they can really put a damper on your work. So let's flip back here. While we were correct, the columns themselves were set to 400 pixels width. However, the padding and the margin properties applied to both of them are actually adding to that 400. So when we go ahead and look at these 2 columns, the amount of gray that we are seeing is actually bigger than 400 pixels. Since we have a padding of 20 pixels that goes around each one of these divs, there is an extra 20 pixels on the right and left of each one of these. So we're actually looking at 440 pixels. So you would think we would actually need 880 pixels in order to pull this off. So we'll go ahead and save that, take a look. Closer, but no cigar. And the reason is because, like I said, we also have a margin in here. And you can almost see it here. Depending on how good you are at visualizing things like a pixel, we've got 10 pixels on the right and left of each one of these, which would equal 20 pixels in between the two of them. And that right there looks to be about 20 pixels to me. So we've got 20 pixels in between them. We've also got 10 pixels on this side and 10 pixels on this side. So we need to add another 40 to this. So we actually are going to need the width to be 920 pixels. Take a look. And there you go. Now they're sitting right next to each other, and they each have 10 pixels. So there you go. Now they're sitting right next to each other with a 20 pixel margin in between the two of them. Again, the 10 and the 10 of each combined. And we've now just created a column. Now, you may be thinking this was a lot of work when we could have just used a table tag. But trust me, the further we dive into CSS and HTML, you'll understand how the tables don't work.